dispositif, an apparatus, a technique. The solution is not to come back to something more original, more natural. No? On the contrary, we have to make inoperative, to neutralize, and perhaps the new politics will result from this confrontation. So it's not coming back to an old politics. It's what will result, perhaps, from a strategy which will face, for instance, the biometric problem. And this I also find very difficult, but also interesting to understand why people have pleasure in this biometric apparatus. Why people do not react. On the contrary, a lot of people are very glad, for instance, you know that, for instance, in France, etc., there's been many question about the school restaurants. Before, students had a card to enter. Now they introduce a biometric apparatus. You put your hand, that has been, so you are recognized and you enter. Why people accept this? There is a kind of pleasure to be recognized by a machine. That's a pleasure. That's a pleasure. But it's the only way that I can. The machine will recognize that it's me, and it will open the door. Not for instance, now you know the future. The architects are criminals. You must never forget who is the perfect criminal today. Many people, but the architects are a good category. The future. There has been a great Congress of Architects about the future architecture. You don't enter in the house with a key. The house will recognize your hand. I don't know how the friend can enter this house. Probably there is a way. But there is, in some way, there is probably a pleasure in person are glad to be recognized by a machine. There is no implication. So a machine that asks nothing, apparently, from you. To be recognized by another person, you have to look in the eyes. And there is a kind of pleasure in this, probably.
Well, there's an aesthetic reason for this. There's a digital aesthetics, because anything that's quantifiable, and we're dealing with two different categories, basically. This is a categorical difference between the qualitative and the quantitative. So the new aesthetic is for the quantitative. What can be turned into some kind of number or code. So the aesthetic is for that. That is good, and the other is not. The reason is because analytic philosophy is the philosophy of science has just taken over the aesthetic, and as a result, if you call yourself an artist or a poet or an architect, for that matter, that's questionable because all of that's a synthetic proposition. But what blood type you are and your genome and all those things are quantifiable. So that becomes analytic. So therefore that becomes true. And the other thing just becomes questionable or not even worth considering. And so our desire now is just for this quantitative analytic.
Yeah, no, but there are lots of things about how can man then forget, for instance, that in this way, if the state becomes Nazi, you are completely in the hand of the, because in this way you are completely, there is no impossible to escape. The Jews were killed without this, but they had some problems, and some Jews could escape. But if now this thing happened, absolutely no way. If biometric control is total, possible to say, no, it's not me, no, it's you, you're a Jew, come on, you're killed.
The Jews were the first to be the victims of this because IBM created a punch card system that resulted in the numbers that were tattooed on their arms. Thank IBM for that. And that was the first use of this kind of statistical bio-identity.
No, but so what I was there are reasons for that. It's interesting to understand that, but also then the problem remains.
But even before that, and leading up to those kind of statistical representations are something much simpler and even more pervasive. Consider the passport and history of the passport. And there are all sorts of evidentiary traces and techniques and mediations that will circulate around and form and constitute, from one perspective or another, identity. And you know very well, if you take your passport and you go through a border, one can look at the passport. There's always a presumption that there is, particularly with a photograph, another photograph somewhere in an archive that will correspond to this photograph. But all it takes is one person having a very bad day to look at that and decide, for whatever reason, it can be a whim. There can be no check and balance on this necessary at all. They don't like your face, and they can decide, now, this doesn't correspond with you, and therefore not with the archive. You don't get to go here, you can't move there, you can't cross this border. So that's a very real effect. And even if you protest, and you're saying, but I'm an artist, it doesn't work. It means nothing. So from that point of contact, it means nothing. And so then when you go to, for example, moving into statistical operations in conjunction with what you said, think of how difficult it is if one acquires a bad credit rating, how you cannot make that go away. So there, I think there are
you must never forget that the biometric techniques begin for the recidivist criminals in the 19th century. No? They were invented by Bertillon after Galton, only for recidivist criminals, because at that moment there were no ID, so it was very difficult to realize, is this man the one who already was here, is this man here? The identity was very fluid. So for criminals, they founded Bertillon, for the first one, invented the señaletic photographs, the mesuration of etc., no? It was the portrait Bertillon, the Bertillon portrait. It was then kept there. And when the second time you arrest the same person, it's him. So it was only for the recidivist, you say in English? The second time. So also to understand, and when they say this is for security, doesn't mean that you can avoid the first, for instance, terroristic attack. This team cannot avoid at all the first terroristic attack. It is to recognize and to control. But it was invented for criminals, and this means that now all citizens are treated by the state as criminals. So because this was invented for criminals, and now they are all potential criminals, so we are all subjected to these techniques.
We heard about the importance of the number in this, the quantitative, and you talk about biometric in the information of our bodies, but none of that makes sense until it is assigned a number, a birth certificate number at birth. And any time there is a biometric checking or registering of a person, the genomic information doesn't make any sense until it is matched to a number. And so either you must touch an apparatus or you must see an apparatus, and it sees you. And so I'm wondering, can we really say that identity rests totally in vegetative life? Or can identity only make sense as vegetative life meets sensation?
But sensation is a quantification of the vegetative given.
You're touching an apparatus or you're seeing an apparatus as it sees you. There's a mutual sensation. And only after that
but
can identity...
this example of seeing another man in the eyes, there you don't see the machine. The machine, the new technique, for instance, you don't see at all the machine. In Israel, the most modern machine, you walk, and the machine takes your eyes, I don't know how, you not even see. I don't think that sensation is there.
Facial recognition.
It's a quantification of a given.
The facial recognition code, for example, it's a biometric. It measures the relationship and correspondence on a face, which can do at a very, very large distance, and you don't even know. You never know.
Yes.
Well, I think it's. I can see how we can quickly get into discussions of how this sort of limits us. How these can sort of create systems of control and organization. This biopolitics. But you could also bring in, I think, some examples in Japanese culture, for instance, of culture which is so